How many times have you felt everything collapsing inside, yet remained silent? Silent despair is a pain that makes no noise, hidden behind calm eyes and automatic smiles. How can we understand this feeling that consumes without warning? In nature, the deer mirrors this instinct, fleeing danger quietly, without a scene. Perhaps, by observing its behavior, we can begin to see what we so often hide from ourselves. There is a quiet nobility in those who endure without a sound. But silence, when worn too long, becomes not a strength, but a cage. The deer teaches us this. It survives by stillness, yes. But a life lived entirely in flight or freeze is a life unclaimed. And so, the question lingers, what can we, as humans, learn from this instinct of silent despair? How do we honor the survival it gave us, while also choosing to step beyond it? First, we must recognize the wisdom in our emotional patterns. Many of us criticize ourselves for shutting down, for being too quiet, for not standing up when it mattered. But if we look closer, we see that these behaviors were never flaws, they were adaptations. A child who grows up in a chaotic home learns to become invisible not out of weakness, but out of a need for safety. A teenager who stops crying does so not because they're numb, but because every tear brought punishment, not comfort. An adult who withdraws emotionally in a relationship often learned that opening up only led to betrayal or ridicule. These are not character defects. They are instinctive responses, just like the deer who learns to freeze when the wind shifts, or to run when the silence grows too loud. When we begin to see our quiet suffering not as shameful, but as evidence of our own survival intelligence, a profound shift begins to occur. We stop blaming ourselves for the ways we learn to cope. But recognition is not the end. The next step is perhaps more difficult, and more liberating, choosing to live differently, even when our nervous system protests. For some, this means speaking a truth they've held back for years. For others, it means asking for help, crying in front of someone trustworthy, or saying, "That hurt me," even when every part of their body begs them to stay silent. These are not small acts. They are radical acts of reclamation. Like the deer emerging cautiously from the tree line at dawn, these moments are the beginning of a new relationship with life, one where safety is no longer defined by invisibility, but by authenticity. We also learn that healing is not linear. Instincts don't vanish because we understand them. Just as the deer remains ever alert to the scent of danger, our bodies may always carry the echoes of what once harmed us. But we can learn to differentiate between real danger and remembered danger. We can learn, slowly and gently, that being seen is no longer fatal. That speaking up doesn't mean being abandoned. That needing something from someone is not the same as being a burden. Therapists often call this process repatterning, but in truth, it is reclaiming. Reclaiming the parts of ourselves we exiled for safety. Reclaiming the voice we muted. Reclaiming our right to belong without apology. And this reclamation often happens in the smallest of ways. A look held a second longer, a sigh released instead of swallowed, a moment where we don't laugh when we want to cry. The deer also teaches us something about the value of sensitivity. In many cultures, sensitivity is dismissed as fragility. But the deer's sensitivity is what allows it to survive. It hears what others cannot, feels shifts in its environment before they're visible. Humans who carry this kind of emotional sensitivity often grow up feeling too much, too intense, too anxious, too emotional. But this sensitivity is not a weakness. It's a radar, a gift, a kind of superpower, when paired with awareness and boundaries. So perhaps the lesson isn't just to stop being silent. It's to listen to the silence inside us and ask what it's trying to protect. Only then can we make new choices. Only then can we say, "Thank you for keeping me safe. But I don't have to hide anymore." To those who recognize themselves in these pages, the quiet strugglers, the emotional escape artists, the frozen and the hidden, know this: you are not alone. Your silence was never emptiness. It was full of stories, instincts, brilliance, and survival. And now, you have permission to speak, to feel, to step out into the clearing, even if your legs shake. Let this be your call to curiosity. What would your life look like if you no longer lived to avoid pain, but to embrace connection? What if safety wasn't silence, but honesty? What if your true self, the one buried under years of stillness, was finally ready to rise? You do not have to roar to be heard. But you do have to show up. And the world is waiting. Sometimes, the most profound emotional suffering is silent. It's found not in breakdowns or loud expressions of pain, but in small, invisible decisions, the choice not to speak, the habit of shrinking away from conflict, the tendency to smile while bleeding internally. These quiet decisions are the emotional equivalents of a deer freezing in tall grass, hoping to survive unseen. Let's explore the stories of people who live this pattern, often unnoticed by the world. Meet Elena, a high-performing project manager in a bustling marketing firm. She's always on time, never complains, and rarely takes sick days. Her team thinks she's the calm one, the person who holds things together. But behind her composed facade lies a mountain of silent despair. At home, she's the emotional caretaker for a partner who oscillates between detachment and criticism. Every time she tries to express a need, she's met with coldness or blame. So she stopped trying. Like a deer that learned early that noise invites danger, Elena moves quietly through her life, minimizing her presence, suppressing her emotions until even she starts to forget they're there. In therapy, Elena once confessed that she doesn't cry, not because she doesn't want to, but because she's forgotten how. Her body, like that of a prey animal conditioned to stay still to survive, has normalized the freeze. She doesn't fight. She doesn't run. She simply exists. Watchful, quiet, emotionally paralyzed. Her despair wears a professional outfit and smiles in meetings. Then there's Darius, a former college athlete turned middle school gym teacher. Everyone sees him as strong, reliable, and good with kids. But Darius carries a different burden, the lingering effects of emotional neglect from his childhood. Raised by parents who equated emotion with weakness, Darius was taught to toughen up from a young age. He learned early that expressing sadness or fear only led to ridicule or punishment. So, over time, he built a fortress around himself. Now in his mid-30s, Darius finds it difficult to connect deeply with others. His relationships start with excitement and warmth but cool quickly. As soon as emotional vulnerability arises, he withdraws, not to manipulate, but because his nervous system equates closeness with risk. Just like a deer that learned to run at the snap of a twig, Darius interprets emotional intimacy as danger. He doesn't even know he's doing it, he just starts canceling plans, pulling back, finding comfort in routine and isolation. Not all examples are so dramatic. Take Lena, a college freshman who, after moving away from home, finds herself constantly anxious in group settings. She nods a lot, agrees with others even when she disagrees, and stays on the edge of conversations. Her friends describe her as sweet, but a bit distant. What they don't know is that Lena grew up in a household where emotional conflict was met with icy silence or guilt. She learned not to cause waves, not to ask too many questions, and above all, not to need too much. So now, in her adult life, she avoids expressing opinions, needs, or emotions, afraid they'll drive people away. Her silence isn't shyness. It's an instinctual response, a survival script she memorized as a child. Like a deer holding its breath in the shadow of a predator, Lena has learned that invisibility equals safety. Then there are collective behaviors, too. In work environments where psychological safety is low, where mistakes are punished harshly, or vulnerability is seen as weakness, entire teams can enter a state of silent despair. People stop speaking up, stop innovating, stop challenging bad ideas. Instead, they nod, comply, and endure. The emotional atmosphere feels frozen. It's not laziness or disinterest, it's the same survival instinct. The herd has gone still. Even in romantic relationships, the deer dynamic often emerges. One partner becomes the emotional pursuer, the other the avoidant. But what looks like indifference is often a nervous system in shutdown mode, a person who has learned that silence is the only path to emotional safety. These patterns lead to resentment, misinterpretation, and emotional loneliness on both sides. But what makes these stories powerful is that they don't end in paralysis. Change becomes possible when the pattern is seen. When Elena began to name her silence not as weakness but as wisdom learned under duress, she cried for the first time in years. When Darius started therapy and heard, for the first time, that emotional suppression wasn't his fault, his walls cracked, and he called his brother just to talk. Lena, after months of quiet observation, raised her hand in class and shared an unpopular opinion. She trembled, but afterward, she smiled for real. These may seem like small steps. But for people who live in silent despair, they are revolutions. Each brave act, a word spoken, a need expressed, a truth admitted, is like stepping out of the tall grass and saying, "I want to be seen." The point of these examples is not to label people as broken or damaged. Quite the opposite. It's to illustrate that these silent behaviors are deeply intelligent responses to environments that once felt unsafe. But the environments change, and the instincts, though once protective, can now become prisons. Recognizing this is the first step to freedom. In our final chapter, we will reflect on what we, as humans, can learn from these patterns. What wisdom lies within the deer's instincts? And how can we use that wisdom not just to survive, but to live, connect, and heal? The image of a person suffering quietly, avoiding conflict, and navigating life with hyper-awareness isn't just poetic, it's biological. Neuroscience and psychology have long studied how humans, much like animals, develop adaptive survival responses to emotional pain. And at the heart of this connection lies the nervous system, which responds to danger, whether real or perceived, in astonishingly similar ways across species. Let's begin with the basics. The autonomic nervous system, the command center that regulates our fight, flight, or freeze responses. When a deer hears a sudden noise in the forest, its body is flooded with adrenaline, its muscles tense, its heart rate spikes, and its senses sharpen, all preparing it to flee. Now picture a child growing up in a volatile household, constantly exposed to yelling, tension, or emotional unpredictability. That child's nervous system begins to operate in the same way. Always scanning, always bracing, always preparing for some form of emotional escape. This is known in psychology as hypervigilance, a state of increased sensitivity to potential threats. It's a hallmark of trauma, anxiety, and prolonged stress. And it's not imagined. Functional MRI scans show that the brains of people who have experienced chronic emotional stress display heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Meanwhile, areas responsible for logic and verbal expression, such as the prefrontal cortex, may go offline in moments of perceived threat. In other words, when someone is triggered emotionally, they may lose the ability to speak, not metaphorically, but neurologically. That's why some people shut down during arguments or retreat when confronted. It's not immaturity or coldness. It's a biologically rooted freeze response. Just as the deer stands motionless in the woods, hoping to avoid detection, the human brain sometimes chooses silence, stillness, or avoidance as the safest route. Another key scientific concept here is polyvagal theory, introduced by Dr. Stephen Porges. It suggests that our nervous system doesn't just toggle between calm and panic, it includes a middle ground of social engagement and a lower gear called shutdown, where we dissociate, disconnect, or numb out. This is exactly what happens in silent despair. A person may still smile, respond politely, or go through the motions, but internally, they've disconnected to avoid overwhelm. Consider also attachment theory, which explains how early relationships with caregivers shape how we respond to stress and connection later in life. Children who grow up with emotionally unavailable or unpredictable parents often develop insecure attachment styles, especially the anxious avoidant type. These individuals learn to suppress their needs, hide their distress, and stay emotionally invisible to avoid rejection or conflict. Just like a fawn hiding in tall grass, motionless, hoping not to be noticed. Biologically, this suppression has consequences. Chronic emotional inhibition is linked to elevated cortisol levels, weakened immune function, and greater risk of depression and anxiety disorders. The toll of silence is not just emotional, it's physiological. Our bodies remember what our minds try to ignore. But it doesn't end in despair. Science also gives us tools for healing. One of the most powerful is co-regulation, the idea that a calm, attuned presence can soothe a stressed nervous system. Just as a deer might relax when sensing the stillness of its herd, humans can regulate their emotional state through safe, non-judgmental relationships. Therapists, trusted friends, or even pets can provide this kind of regulatory safety. Another vital insight comes from expressive writing and storytelling. Research by Dr. James Pennebaker found that individuals who wrote honestly about their emotional experiences showed improved immune responses, lower blood pressure, and enhanced mental clarity. Silence, when gently broken, can begin to heal. And then there's mindfulness, a practice rooted in observing without judgment. Studies show that regular mindfulness meditation reduces amygdala reactivity and increases gray matter in areas associated with self-awareness and compassion. When a person begins to notice their emotional freeze patterns with kindness, rather than shame, they start to build internal safety. Even movement therapies, such as trauma-informed yoga or somatic experiencing, recognize that emotional healing isn't just a matter of talking. It's about teaching the body that it's safe again. That the muscles no longer need to brace. That the breath can return to rhythm. That the deer can stop running. Importantly, science doesn't pathologize these behaviors. Instead, it honors them as intelligent adaptations. Avoidance, emotional suppression, even social withdrawal, they are not signs of being broken. They are survival strategies that once worked. But what worked to protect us then may limit us now. The key is awareness. When we understand that our silence isn't emptiness but a signal, a stress response, an echo of past danger, we can stop blaming ourselves. And once we stop blaming, we can start healing. So, yes, the deer and the human carry the same legacy, the legacy of hiding to survive. But science offers us a crucial difference. Humans, unlike deer, can tell their story. We can reflect, connect, and rebuild safety through conscious effort. In the next chapter, we will explore real-world examples of this connection, people you may recognize, stories that echo your own, and the powerful transformation that happens when silent despair is finally understood and honored. There are people who walk into a room and scan for exits without realizing it. People who smile gently, laugh politely, and never interrupt, but whose bodies are tight with unspoken tension. They shrink from conflict. They avoid attention. They live, like the deer, in a state of beautiful invisibility. And just like the deer, they've learned that safety often means silence. The parallel between the deer's instinctual vigilance and human emotional despair is not a poetic stretch. It's a mirrored truth. When a person experiences chronic emotional pain, grief, anxiety, trauma, and feels unable to express it, their behavior subtly shifts. They become attuned to micro-expressions, just as the deer watches for a subtle flicker of danger. They anticipate emotional threats long before others even register them. A frown. A raised voice. A sigh. Everything is a signal. Every signal is a possible threat. Like the deer pausing mid-step at the crack of a twig, these individuals freeze at emotional disruption. They don't fight, they withdraw. They excuse themselves. They say, "I'm just tired," or "I'm fine." But their eyes say otherwise. Their bodies lean away, not toward. They're already halfway out the door before the danger becomes real. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. Just like the deer has no claws to defend itself, some people have no space to explode. So they implode. Quietly. In relationships, these emotional deer are often misunderstood. Their quietness is mistaken for aloofness. Their sensitivity is misread as fragility. But they are survivors. Just as the deer doesn't reveal its hiding spot, these people don't reveal their emotional truth. They've learned that to expose is to risk attack. That showing their pain may invite judgment, rejection, or pity, all of which hurt more than silence. Think of the coworker who never shares personal struggles, who performs perfectly but fades in group settings. Or the friend who listens to everyone else's problems but never speaks about their own. Or the parent who manages the household with quiet efficiency, never asking for help, even when they're breaking inside. These are not rare anomalies. They are emotional deer, individuals surviving through concealment, navigating a loud world without making a sound. And yet, inside, there's often chaos. The deer shakes in secret after escaping a predator. Humans do the same, not physically perhaps, but emotionally. They cry in locked bathrooms. They rehearse confrontations that will never happen. They journal feelings they can't say aloud. They suppress panic attacks with practiced breathing and a calm smile. They survive by pretending to be unbothered, even when their inner world is unraveling. In social dynamics, deer like humans instinctively manage their visibility. They sit at the edges of the room. They offer support but resist asking for it. They fade in during group conversations but never dominate them. Just like a deer edges around a clearing but never stands in the center, these individuals stay on emotional peripheries. They monitor, they assess, and only when it feels absolutely safe do they step forward, and even then, it's tentative. These behaviors aren't necessarily choices. They are instinctual responses rooted in past experiences, emotional neglect, betrayal, loss, or fear of vulnerability. Just as a deer doesn't need to be taught to flee from danger, many humans don't need to be taught to hide their pain. Their nervous system does it for them. It's a biological echo of ancient survival mechanisms, a strategy not of weakness, but of resilience. Even in healing, these individuals mirror deer-like recovery. A deer that's wounded doesn't return to the herd limping in front of everyone. It finds a secluded place to recover. Humans do the same. They disappear from social media. They cancel plans. They isolate. Not because they don't want connection, but because they fear being seen in their most fragile state. Healing, for them, is private. Quiet. Unannounced. And yet, this survival strategy has costs. The constant vigilance is exhausting. The silence becomes isolating. The invisibility begins to feel like erasure. A deer that flees too often becomes too tired to run. Similarly, a human who hides too long may forget how to be seen. They may crave connection but feel paralyzed by it. They may want to scream but have forgotten how to raise their voice. That's where the metaphor deepens. Because even deer need safe spaces. Quiet meadows. Gentle herds. Places where they don't have to run. People with silent despair need that too. Emotionally safe relationships where vulnerability isn't punished, where silence isn't misinterpreted, and where they can finally, softly, exhale. Understanding this parallel changes how we view silence. It stops being emptiness and becomes information. It becomes a language. A deer standing still isn't doing nothing, it's communicating caution. A person who retreats isn't rejecting you, they're protecting themselves. The silence is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of fear, the presence of memory, the presence of deep, deep need. So the next time you encounter someone who withdraws, who hesitates, who seems overly attuned to tension, consider the deer. And ask, what might they be sensing that you cannot? What might they be feeling but unable to voice? What if their silence is not indifference, but their version of a scream? In the next chapter, we will step into the science. The psychology and biology that explain why these parallels exist so clearly, and why recognizing them may be the first step toward healing, for both humans and their inner deer. In the quiet woods, just before dawn, a shadow moves between the trees. It doesn't rustle branches. It doesn't cry out. It simply passes, alert and graceful. This is the deer, a creature that survives by listening more than speaking, by hiding more than confronting, and by moving silently through danger instead of standing to fight it. To understand silent despair, one must look at the world through the eyes of a deer. The deer's existence is defined by vigilance. Every moment of its life is a negotiation between calm and alarm. Its large, expressive eyes are constantly scanning for threats, its ears twitch at the slightest sound, and its legs are always ready to sprint. But the deer doesn't scream when frightened. It doesn't roar or growl. Instead, it flees. With silence. With grace. With urgency. This instinct is its survival, a built-in knowledge that to draw attention is to risk death. Unlike predators, who control their environments with strength and dominance, deer have no such luxury. Their power lies in sensitivity. They perceive changes before they are visible. A shift in wind. A broken twig. The scent of something unfamiliar. And then they vanish, melting into the forest, as if they were never there at all. It's a life shaped by the need to remain unseen. A quiet performance of endurance. This instinctive silence is not cowardice, it's wisdom. In the wild, noise is a liability. Sound reveals position. Emotion creates distraction. And distraction, for prey animals like the deer, is dangerous. So, they internalize reaction. They breathe deeply, hold still, and wait. A deer may freeze in place for minutes, its body tight with tension, just waiting for the danger to pass. What looks like peace is actually hypervigilance, a familiar state for many who suffer from silent despair. Deer are deeply social animals. They form herds for protection, companionship, and warmth. Yet, even within these groups, there is space. They rarely press too close. There's a respectful distance between bodies, an unspoken rule of emotional management that ensures the herd stays alert and functional. Vulnerability is not displayed openly. If a deer is injured, it might trail behind but won't cry out. Crying draws predators. So again, silence is the answer. This behavior isn't selfish, it's collective survival. One of the most haunting behaviors in deer is their reaction after trauma. When a deer is caught and escapes, say from a trap or a predator's claws, it doesn't collapse and weep. It bolts, disappears into the forest, and later, alone and hidden, it may shake violently. The tremors help discharge the panic from its body. It's instinctive, a physical purge. Then, if it survives, it returns to its quiet existence. It doesn't announce its trauma. It doesn't mark the forest with cries. It just continues. The deer's physical features also reflect its emotional symbolism. Its eyes, wide, soft, and reflective, seem to carry a weight of ancient worry. Its slender frame is built for speed, not confrontation. Its movements are rhythmic, careful, and calculated. There's no recklessness in a deer. Everything is considered. Every step, every pause, every breath is part of a survival dance. In mythology and culture, the deer often represents gentleness, purity, and inner strength. In many Native American traditions, the deer symbolizes sensitivity and intuition, a guide through emotional terrain. In Celtic lore, the stag is a guardian of thresholds, a symbol of passage between the known and the mysterious. Even in dreams, to see a deer is often interpreted as a sign of hidden emotions, quiet resilience, or suppressed fears. And yet, despite all this poetic symbolism, the deer's reality is far from peaceful. Its life is a constant watchtower. It must manage fear without release, urgency without panic. It is hunted, misunderstood, and rarely allowed the luxury of rest. Just like the humans who carry silent despair, the deer survives by adapting, by moving when it wants to freeze, by hiding when it wants to collapse, and by never letting its pain make a sound. There's something profoundly tragic and beautiful in this. The deer, in all its elegance, is not soft because the world is gentle, but because softness is how it survives a harsh world. And that's the emotional truth we see reflected in the human experience. Those who are quiet are not always calm. Those who are gentle are not always free of struggle. And those who seem peaceful may, like the deer, be trembling just beneath the surface. When we see a deer standing still at the edge of the forest, ears twitching, eyes fixed, we are not witnessing calm, we are witnessing alertness disguised as serenity. And this is precisely the metaphor of silent despair. The individual may look composed, functional, even graceful, but beneath that stillness is a body on high alert, a mind navigating fear, and a heart longing for safety. The deer doesn't roar. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't demand space. But it deserves it. Just like those living with invisible emotional weight. In the coming chapters, we'll explore exactly how this connection unfolds. And what we can learn from this quiet creature who, like many of us, survives through stillness and silence. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't punch walls, sob uncontrollably, or demand attention. It walks quietly, wears a smile when necessary, and nods during small talk. Silent despair is not theatrical. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply exists, in the quiet of long nights, in the pause before an answer, in the breath someone holds before saying, "I'm fine." And while it might not be loud, it is profoundly heavy. Silent despair often takes root in people who feel they can't afford to collapse. They are the dependable ones, caregivers, professionals, parents, the strong friends. They don't talk about what's weighing on them, not because they don't feel it, but because they fear being a burden. They believe that showing vulnerability will make everything around them fall apart. And so, they continue. Not because they are strong, but because they think they have no other choice. This emotional state isn't sudden. It creeps in, inch by inch. It begins when someone swallows their hurt to keep peace in the family. When they don't speak up at work out of fear. When they stay silent during conflict because they believe their pain is less important than harmony. Over time, these small silences accumulate. What was once occasional becomes habitual. Eventually, it becomes identity, the person who doesn't complain, the one who always copes. You see it in the mother who wakes up before everyone and goes to bed last, never once mentioning how exhausted she is. In the manager who performs perfectly in meetings but stares blankly at the wall at night. In the teenager who jokes around with friends but feels like screaming into the void. They all seem normal. But inside, their souls are screaming quietly, begging for someone to notice. Silent despair is not just emotional, it has a physical footprint. Sleepless nights become the norm. Appetite swings between extremes. The heart races without cause. Tension settles in the shoulders, headaches come without warning, and breathing feels shallow even in calm moments. These aren't isolated symptoms, they are whispers from a body that's tired of carrying what the mind refuses to say. What makes this condition even more dangerous is its invisibility. Because the person is still showing up, still laughing at jokes, still sending emails and attending gatherings, people assume they're okay. And so, help rarely arrives. After all, who would reach out to someone who seems fine? That's the cruel paradox, the better one becomes at hiding it, the less likely anyone is to see. It's important to understand that this silence is not weakness, and it's not manipulation. It's survival. For many, there was never space to express pain. Maybe they were taught that emotions are a sign of weakness. Maybe their needs were dismissed in childhood. Maybe they grew up in environments where only loud crises got attention. And so, they learned to internalize pain, to turn suffering inward instead of expressing it. People experiencing silent despair often become the best listeners. They're deeply empathetic, emotionally intelligent, and attuned to the needs of others. Ironically, they understand pain so well that they become emotional safe havens for those around them, while simultaneously believing no one has room for theirs. They give endlessly but cannot receive. They comfort others while silently breaking inside. Eventually, this leads to emotional numbness. A person in silent despair may not even cry anymore. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't. Emotions become muted, joy feels distant, and the world takes on a grayish hue. They aren't alive, they're functioning. There's a big difference. And this is the tipping point. If the despair is not acknowledged, by themselves or by someone close, it can spiral into burnout, depression, or complete emotional shutdown. The mask becomes permanent, and the person behind it feels further and further away. But what if this internal collapse isn't unique to humans? What if there's a creature that lives the same way? Always on alert, always prepared to run, but never making a sound. That's where nature offers us a mirror. And in that mirror, stands the deer, delicate, aware, and always silently fleeing from danger.